So today I've got MK and Lensis and Anthony and JP and I back again to talk openly as we can about the mental obsession and the ideas we have that may or may not be true, but cause a lot of calamity when we make believe they are, and start to focus on how we can interact in a level that is more open. This past week, I had a phone call from my older daughter who had just received a phone call from the hospital that my younger daughter had been in a serious car accident and was in critical condition and later died that morning. And given the nature of our conversation, really looking at reality and truth is something that goes beyond what we think about it, I would think that this is a good opportunity to discuss it from that viewpoint of life maybe not ending when bodies die and brains die and thoughts die, but actually it being a transformation of whatever it is, some sort of a transition from one experience to either another, or from a physical manifestation, temporal manifestation, into an awareness that is seemingly always either obvious or talked about after death, but seldom seemingly talked about while we're alive. Because if that thing is infinite, if that thing is spiritual, if that thing is always, and in all ways, all things, for all that are and all that is, then it certainly would also be here now, where we are. Not wait, we don't have to wait for death to find out if there is an afterlife, if in fact life exists now, and we're afraid of death and preoccupied with ideas that are wrong about it. As a result, literally being afraid of life in the name of thoughts that we think are true and real, that have no basis in reality and truth, only a basis in the thinking we do about the thinking we do. And I don't say that to diminish my grief or my mourning or my sense of loss, because I knew this little girl since the day she was born. And she gave me lots of challenges. And a lot of opportunities to grow up, and I'm not sure I did in all cases. And I can certainly sit and critique and try to referee the past, but I also realize that what it is, and if it was, it is what now is as a result of all of that and the accumulation of all that. It's not something I can chase away or talk away or figure out how to get rid of, but something I'm learning to live with. And that was sort of the theme of the time I spent with my family up in Oakland in Northern California. So, she also leaves behind a 13-year-old daughter that we are now, taking responsibility for and recognizing the difficulty for her, but also the chance for her to transition in a direction she never expected and do it in some way that would obviously be different than if she'd continued living with her mother. She's got 6 parents now instead of 1. So some of them even adults, which I'm not sure I'm included in. My daughter is overwhelmed with grief and also, ready to step into the role. So, and everyone loves her. And, I don't think the love ever leaves. I think our thoughts about love are the things that come and go. So anyway, good morning.
Jack, I appreciate you sharing that. Very sorry you're dealing with that.
Me too. Me too, in one respect. But in this other respect, what is really profound to me is how this transition is something everyone is going through at some point, that billions of people have already gone through. It seems to be one thing we do perfectly, and yet during life strive for perfection. And seeing things, missing someone is also dismissing a presence if they're here. If they are, in fact, if the nature of nature is spiritual and nature is omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent, then that presence would be exactly where we are now. It obviously is in a form that isn't a form and doesn't have the same human bodily functions that we are used to. But it may also have a knowing sense that we absolutely know right now and tend to dismiss because we don't think we know it, because our thinking is somehow on such a collision course so often with our thinking that the preoccupation of trying to sort it out helps us dismiss this absolute state of being that we all share, whether we are in living forms like life, like human forms or animal forms or tree in nature's forms or not. And nature is a great example of the transmission, this sort of transmission and transfusion of transformation, because something is constantly dying off while other things are constantly regenerated. And that's even within our seeming relative world. So if the basis of that is the basis of existence and that doesn't change, then what would change now but our thoughts about it if we feel somehow we're missing or losing someone? And maybe the mourning is just my own mourning of having those ideas in relation to the abundance of an absolute state of being and coming to terms with that in my thinking. So I realize, okay, this is a transition that we're all ready to go through at some point, even when we think we're not. And when it happens, we will do it. And it's probably a lot more eye-opening than it is eye-shutting in terms of the fact of trying to think of it as something to avoid and to deny and hope that never comes, rather than see it's absolutely coming. It's part of this process. But it doesn't diminish those other feelings too, because on a human level, we get used to each other and we like people and we like attention and admiration and support and often problems, like Anthony and I were talking about earlier. The problems, the closer we focus on them, the bigger they seem to get. And at some point, they seem to be all that's happening, when in fact, they're not all that's happening. They're just all we're focused on. So I am very thankful that you guys here now and so many others that have come through and sort of they get a glimpse and go off on their direction. We hear back from them in 2 or 3 months or whatever. But that you come and we can have this conversation and open it up and look at different angles and thoughts and share it together. And MK, when we met originally, I know that you came through another friend of mine who happened to hear you talking, and he got a sense that you might find a place in this conversation. And I appreciate that you have. And same with Lenses, who came through Anthony. So it's done me an enormous amount of good to prepare for days like this or weeks like this. And I'm very thankful for that. And I wouldn't call you all family in the same sense I call my other family, but in the other sense, you're absolutely family in that same sense. And that may not seem to make sense, but
thanks, Jack.
It's just what rolled off my tongue. My sense is if we're all part of the same thing, it's not as big and broad as it seems when we think we're only a small part of it all, when we begin to realize we're a part of everything, not some things and someone and some bodies, but everything, all of it, simultaneously. So if that's our conversation, my expectation would be things that couldn't be expected would be said, awarenesses would be well beyond the limits of those thoughts that we tend to focus on or repeat in different ways, and start to actually see the awe and inspiration rather than confirm the desperation and the diminishment of our capacity as something that we constantly want to try to get over, rather than see it as something that is already over once we start trying to make it over by focusing on it again. So what's done is done, and what is here now is actually the accumulation of all those things, including every one of those bodies that has ever been here and done anything. And we're in that moment. We are witnesses of that moment right now. Everyone and everywhere. Everyone everywhere that we can't see now, and everyone everywhere that can't be seen at all because they're no longer visible to us. Doesn't mean invisibility. is invisible, because understanding is really about seeing. Understanding is the human form of seeing things that can't be seen visually. So we talk about understanding here, I would think, to a degree, and also knowing. If we understand, we have a greater sense of knowing and begin to understand it enough to confirm whenever we're feeling we don't, that we do regardless of how we're feeling. There's a good chance our thinking will start to align with it, since we're not antagonistic or belligerent or defying or denying that greater sense of knowing. So, MK, you I remember very quickly had a sense that something was going on that you hadn't paid any attention to, but you knew also. You had a very clear sense of knowing, and I think Lxii did too, as newer comers in the process. Because I've known JP for 25 years, I've known Anthony for many years, and a lot of the other people that have been in this discussion.
Well, you give me a lot of credit, my friend, but you have a uncanny ability to summarize the ideas and thoughts that go on, and the way you explain it helps me navigate that. And I'll share a really funny story that happened a few weeks ago. Anna was just kind of having a day and emotional about different things, not in the sense of, crying or anything, but just struggling with thoughts she was having. And I said, why don't you ever talk to Jack? And she goes, why would I do that? I was like, well, I mean, he's always, he's just available to talk. He's like, yeah, but he's just going to tell me to knock it off.
No, I'm going to tell her to.
Like,
I would tell her to focus harder. if you want to struggle, go for it. Embrace it. I mean, the real freedom comes in going all in, rather than thinking we're half there or should be. It's stepping deeper and saying, "Oh man, if I can get deeper in this, I can also get shallower. I can also be free." It's like if we can make something worse, we can certainly make it better. Feeling that we can't is just a condition created by the thinking about thinking that it's all we can do, because all we're thinking about is that thing. And all of a sudden it seems to feel as though that's all that's happening and nothing else is happening. And as a result, nothing else can happen. And so the impossibility seems impossible, when in fact the impossibility of thinking what we're doing by thinking so closely about something is actually the impossibility we're feeling. We're just magnifying it, like putting our hand up to our eyes. But MK, to give you credit where you'd like to give it to me, I've talked about this for a long time, as JP knows. I've kind of driven people nuts a little bit longer than you, for instance, in the sense that I kind of sensed things, but I didn't know how to talk about them. And as I did, and as I got deeper into the commitment to begin to express it, what I realized is that I couldn't possibly convey any of this if everyone didn't already know it, because it can't be done in words. The words are just little. Oliver Wendell Holmes said that words are the skin of ideas, and ideas are invisible. They're just thoughts. There's this sort of illusion of imagery that goes on in our brain, and we create narratives around that imagery and stories then around that imagery, like we're setting a stage and creating a theater production or a movie. And as it seems more real, it seems more real, but it's just like a dream, because we're with our eyes open developing this whole story that goes on that we think becomes reality, just like it feels real when we witness a movie, because we are affected by the manifestations of our experience in that movie. Or a dream, when we're dreaming, has the same effect. It seems real till we wake up. But when we wake up, we generally say, oh, that was a dream. If it was a scary dream, we say, oh, good, that's over. We know it's over. But yet in this awakened dream, we often try to rewrite the script, come up with the better ending, rather than realize that whole narrative is just something our brain is capable of doing. It isn't reality. It isn't who we are. It isn't who anyone is. It's just what we're thinking about those things. So if that knowing sense is hard to translate into words, the words don't need to translate it, but they can certainly point, like pointing to a mountain. It would be hard to point to a specific tree on the mountain, but you could certainly point to the mountain with the trees on it. And if we're talking about something so grand as something that's all powerful and omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent, then it doesn't take a lot of reference to confirm, not because we immediately think it's there, but we have a sense something's there that we can't even comprehend. And so if it seems incomprehensible, that would be a good indication that our thoughts are not comprehending too much because we have an awareness beyond the comprehension of our thoughts. So what's incomprehensible all of a sudden is known because it doesn't take comprehension or apprehension, like to apprehend something. It doesn't take thoughts to hold it for it to be, because thoughts are just thinking about it, not becoming it, not actualizing that reality. They're just thinking about it. So if you know that, and if it is known in absolute terms, then it would be something you know and everyone knows. And to see it in those terms is to see everyone as part of the same thing, which, if that's remembered in the process of all the divisiveness that thoughts can play on us as we use them in different ways, it's very reassuring to say, oh, that person is as intact as I am, can't be any different. So what I'm seeing in them is something I'm doing, not to them, but I'm simply thinking about them. This is my thinking I'm seeing in them. So it isn't them that I'm seeing my thoughts in them, just like they're experiencing their thoughts about me and thinking that may be me. When we take our thoughts seriously enough to believe that they're true, all of a sudden the lens that we look through seems to be telling us what reality is and what reality isn't. But the beauty of reality is that it can't not be. So there is no is or isn't in it. It just is what it is as it is. And there is no other option. The opposite of something absolute is the same thing, which is clearly distinct from the seeming experience we have in a physical realm, where the opposite is an extreme position that seems to oppose the position we're in. But the only reason it seems to oppose that is because we think those decisions we make to take positions are intractable and the only things we can take when we think our thoughts are true, rather than just a choice, something we've decided to take. Good morning, Gabe.
Morning, Jet.
Morning, Gabe.
Morning.
I like how Lindsay's name is Lenses. Lenses, the way you see the world, lenses.
I think that's how it's pronounced too.
Lenses.
So, Gabe, something I mentioned to the group, and I'm bringing it in here unabashedly. Last Tuesday, my daughter was apparently in a car accident and was killed.
Oh my God, Jack. It's awful.
So I've spent the week up there with the family. And we still don't actually know what happened. I mean, we've gotten sort of mixed conclusions, and they thought she was on drugs and went on the wrong side of the road and just started driving erratically and all that. And I said to the officer, I said, that would be extremely unusual for my daughter to just, go off, launch in that direction. And they realized that there had been no trauma to her body, and there was nothing to suggest the accident actually caused her death, and they began to wonder whether it wasn't some other medical condition that set in. But regardless of that, given the story we were just describing, the conclusion's the same. She did not make it. And my daughter called me, and, I went to be with her immediately because the two of them were in constant contact with each other for their whole life. And, we just started the process that people go through, grieving and mourning and also remembering and remembering the best parts and also the struggles, and just kind of coming to terms with it. But as a team, we did pretty well. We've got a 13-year-old granddaughter now, who is my granddaughter, who's without any parents. And, but she's got probably 6 or 8 up there that are wholly dedicated to her, and my daughter down here and I and Katie. And so we're going to figure it out, and just like I told Anthony, that's something I realize we're going to learn to live with, not something we're going to get over, not something we're going to minimize or diminish or change, but something we're just going to live with and let what comes may. So our conversation has been focused on this whole idea of death. And my sense is what we fear most are the death of the ideas that we think define us, when in fact they don't define us at all. They define what we think. And if we've taken thinking to be reality, when we think about our thinking, we think we're defined by that. Because thinking of itself, all of a sudden we become the self we're thinking of, and all we do is think about ourselves seemingly, but really all we're doing is thinking about our thinking, rather than a greater knowing awareness that is not in thinking, but thinking is obviously a product of, if in fact that is an infinite knowing awareness. So I don't want to, probably had times when I thought I was an exception to all of these things, and the fact that they hadn't happened to me had me feel better because they hadn't happened to me. But it's kind of a sick thing to think because they happened to others and not to me that I'm better off. Well, it's really a dismissing of the pain that others go through and the struggles others go through, which is natural in our progression or process, since everyone eventually goes through this. And to pretend it's not happening for anyone else and I'm better because it hasn't happened to me is just another form of the denial and the defiance and the delusion that somehow or another, if I ignore it, it isn't there. And it's the exact same process I go through by ignoring my own frailty and my own conflicts, inner conflicts, and not noticing that they're telling me something about what I'm doing, and what I'm primarily doing is thinking. As a doing, thinking is an action, so it's doing, and because it's happening. So
Let me take this in the way it's intended, Jack. I always try and push back on you because I love you. Number one.
thank you.
People would say that you're trying to think yourself out of this pain and emotion.
Right.
You're trying to use this logic we discuss every day for everyday problems to work out the loss of your child.
Right.
It's so new. I don't know if you've had the time to gather all those ideas, but.
Well, in my experience, Gabe, I've been talking about this all along. Now I have something that's happened so directly to me, I can actually, see if the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
And my sense is if I'm missing something because I think it isn't here, but it actually is here, then I'm dismissing that something, which is why I'm missing that thing. If you follow that.
No, say that again.
Okay, so let's say there's an infinite source. Let's just, again, we're going out on a limb here because it isn't a presumption. I believe it is a presumption, but it isn't presumed. It's just a state of a priori knowing. That's that knowing, which has always been in philosophy for thousands of years. They've contemplated that kind of knowing. If there is that kind of knowing, then there's a cohesiveness that does not go away and does not change. And it is the essence of existence, not some optional, transferable, transitional thing that we have. It's just a state of being. So a body relies on that, just like a tree relies on that, and water relies on that, and the planets rely on that, and the universe relies on that. So if I'm thinking somebody's gone because the body's gone, I'm reducing everything they are, not to the substance or essence, but I'm reducing it to the form. And that form happens to have a brain that thinks. And again, confirming that all I think I am is what I think. Now, if that other essence is there and if I'm missing the body and dismissing the essence, what I'm really missing is the essence by focusing so much on the body and all those things. And I'm not suggesting, Gabe, that this hasn't taken a bite out of me and had a dramatic, I've known this little girl, I imagine, since she was conceived. This is not some person that I met once and had an experience with. She and I have played tug of war through her whole life and had great respect for one another because I tend to be somewhat firm in where I stand, at least to speak to it. And she tends to be extraordinarily firm in what she sees as right and fought for people on that basis. She was an attorney who ended up disbarred because of a complaint that a client filed, and she didn't have because she was dealing with almost indigent people. She had no money. And I offered her the money and she said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let them use the basis of my poverty to make believe that somehow or another I need to fight them to preserve something that she now saw wasn't something she wanted to be a part of anyhow. If that's the way it went, she said, I don't want any part of it. I'm going to go in another direction. She was disbarred.
Wow.
So I'm sure there was some stuff in there that she did that was not quite right. But for the most part, I knew her commitment. Her commitment in college, when she went to law school, she put herself through law school. I mean, I can tell you the stories, but she was, I had given her every directive in how to, in a state like California, how to go to college, which is state universities, right? We have the best and some of the best in the country. They're inexpensive relative to private schools and other schools out of state. So she wasn't taking the classes to qualify her. And I said, Joey, if you can't get into those schools, I can't afford it at the time. I said, I can't afford to do that. And she said, don't worry, Dad, I got it. I said, okay. So she ended up getting a complete scholarship to Mills up in Oakland, great school, had grants, everything paid, ended up.
She did really well in her test, I guess, her entrance exam.
Everything, you know.
Yeah.
She was prepared, then went to law, decided she wanted to go to law school. And I said, how are you going to do that? She said, don't worry, I got it. Got grants. They had an obligation during her 3 years because it was a social law school, meaning that people were really bent on doing social work.
Mm-hmm.
She had to do 700 hours in her 3 years, and she did them all in the first year of nonprofit work and started working with battered women and got into the women who had been convicted of murder before. The battered woman syndrome was a defense against murder. And most of those women, by the way, spend more time than men for murder. Men often spend 18, 20 years. Women will be in there for 30 years. And she went, and her job was to get people out. And she worked hard. And there's a lot of them that are on the street today, men and women, because if she found a case she liked, she went after it. Didn't get paid much. And somebody claimed she never did anything for them because they wanted their money back. And she said, I'm not going to bend. She said she was fierce.
Yeah.
But it also was a failing of sorts because she was inflexible at points and would be so rigid that she'd collapse everything. But I have plenty of history in that same regard. So I don't want to diminish all those things because we are having a human experience here. But if within that experience, I want to reduce everything to mourning and grief and loss, when in fact that mourning and grief and loss may be my own awareness of the mourning and grief and loss I have for not recognizing the essence that's absolutely always here, which we've talked about well before this circumstance happened, then maybe the grieving and mourning I'm doing has nothing to do with the person. And again, becomes this self-centered idea about myself that I'm mourning the loss of, which I would say would be anxiety and depression on any given day, not just when something horrible happens or seemingly horrible happens. Seemingly. So yes, I'm probably not, my mother died when I was 15. I didn't really mourn it for 11 years. So Gabe, I got a lot in me to deny and overlook and pretend and all that stuff for sure. It took me 11 years to say, I miss my mom, and started sort of the melting of the iceberg that had built in me, trying to pretend that everything was okay. So I have a little experience with that, but it doesn't prevent me from continuing to do those sorts of things. And yet within a functional capacity, I don't think being completely incapacitated is the goal either here. If some of it is, we spent 3 or 4 days just basically hugging and crying and shaking and going through that, and also taking the calls from friends or returning, family who was sort of coming in and out of focus. And but at the same time, there's some business at hand that needs attention. Where do we take the body? Where does that go? How does she want it? What did she say? What are her medical directives? Getting all that stuff takes a little bit of focus, and I don't think anybody's going to do it for any of us, but the us who's involved. So it takes, it's probably a relief in a way to have something to do as a reminder that the experience can be a drowning pool, but it can also be constructive at the same time and functional. So, but yeah, this could all just be make-believe and hocus pocus and a complete fantasy and an attempt to make sense of something that seems to make no sense. So the question there is, since it almost seems like we have to wait to die before we know, is why do we think we have to wait to die before we know? That seems to be, people say, what about the afterlife? If the afterlife exists, wouldn't it be here too? If it's infinite, why do we literally think, just like we think in our own individual thoughts, that the limit of my thoughts is the totality of everything there is to think about? Aren't we also doing that collectively to make believe that the only point at which we'll find that afterlife and be able to rest in peace, which would be the nature of an absolute being nature or awareness or knowing awareness in the absolute omniscient form, would be something simple enough to be at peace? We talk about resting in peace only after death. We have people on earth having near-death experiences when they're pushed way beyond their capacity to comprehend what's happening, and experience things that are profoundly different than they've experienced in their experience, their human experience. And we're not giving credit for maybe that thing that they're witnessing is exactly where we are now, while we're constricted by the ideas we keep reinforcing and pay attention to and make believe that since all our attention is being paid to limited ideas, all we are is limited. We're doing it collectively the same way we do it individually, as far as I can tell. So one of the points earlier with MK, for instance, was I gave him credit for, when we first talked, he got it very quickly. And I could see that it had an impact on him. I don't know. I can never gauge what the breadth of the impact is, but I can see the difference in terms of someone, because there's questions generally and curiosity and almost an raised eye up where they start looking up and saying, oh, wow, oh, kind of like coming to terms with the fact that there may be more than the limited thoughts they're having. So if we didn't have that, none of us would know this. None of us could participate in this and even consider it, because all we'd be doing is thinking about our thinking and thinking that's all that was. And the only thing we could do is to do that relatively alone, or fight for everybody else to listen to the thinking that we thought was right. And I wouldn't say that's a small part of how we're living, but I would say that the fact that we're experiencing that is a commitment to the limited thinking as being all that there is. And if it isn't, I think we're missing the splendor, the abundance, the spontaneity, the inspiration, the awe of life presently. And I would say that is a traumatic experience to make believe. We've all been traumatized. We don't need to be traumatized in a collision in a car by a weapon of some sort to be constantly traumatized by our own ideas and make believe that that nightmare that we create in our thinking is true. So we were talking about dreams a little bit and how we can wake up from a dream and realize it was a dream and realize there's nothing to fear. It was a dream. I'm still in my bed. I'm still in my home. I'm not being chased. I'm not falling off a building. And yet in this other experience, we don't seem to want to wake up. Or we think by changing the dream that we're better, rather than realizing it's a dream. It's just a concoction of thought, manufacturing a narrative that isn't reality and truth. It's just a consideration. It's just an imagination. And it puts thinking in its place because that's what thinking does. It contemplates and looks at and it analyzes and compares and contrasts and trying to make sense of the physical realm that we're in, which apparently doesn't make sense until we apply a little bit of sense to it, to us, because we're thinking of it in relation to our needs individually. So I wouldn't think it's practical to think that that's all there is, if in fact there's more. And it wouldn't feel unnatural if we didn't think our nature was limited to the thoughts, just the thoughts, and think that that's all we are, so that's all that is, and that's all we can do, and it's all we should do, and it's all there is to do. So that's a lengthy response to that question, Gabe.
I have to take off, everyone. Appreciate your time. Jack, love you, sir.
Bye,
We'll definitely
MK.
catch up soon.
Say hi to Anna.
Will do.
How's your baby?
Hmm?
How's the new baby?
In case.
Who? Oh, I don't got a new baby.
Oh,
Oh, I
No
thought you
little
did.
ones here.
Anne is the newest baby, and she's great.
Yeah, she's doing awesome. All right, love you guys.
See ya.
Did they just have a baby?
I don't think so.
I thought
Apparently,
they did.
how
I
old,
guess not. Otherwise, they forgot.
how old was your daughter, Jay?
43. Half my father's age, who she adored. So yeah, I don't want to dismiss this, Gabe. I don't want to dismiss the human aspect of this at all, because it's evident. But I also wonder if we aren't. It's interesting that we would be so fixated on death as something to avoid and be shocked by, rather than see it as a transformation and a transition that's natural, absolutely built into the scheme of this experience we're having, versus something horrific and something that should never happen. And certainly when you're young, and it's a shock in terms of it being a surprise and not planned on, and certainly there's no convalescing and no long-term 2 years of having a disease and actually being able to talk to everybody about it and reckon with that, whatever's going on. Very different when it happens very, very quickly. But I don't know that isn't simply a possibility that we think, because it hasn't happened to us, will never happen. And there again, thinking sort of runs to the rescue while it's creating the dilemma. I've gotten very comfortable with the fact that everything that's possible is possible, period. So I don't wonder what's going to go on as much. I basically presume what's going to go on is what happens. And it doesn't mean I don't have interests in
That was
doing
great.
things.
I love that, Jack.
Thank you.
I'm going to steal that.
No. You utilize, my words are not your words, and you're going to see and hear things in ways that will be unique enough for me to value what you're saying, because you'll see it in a way that gives me a little perspective in my human experience.
Say that again, though, the thing that I liked.
You'll have to re-listen to it.
Because you can't even say it again. That's how profound it is. Damn.
I can. I'm just not. I'm not going to try to recreate it, because
What was it? You said basically, I forgot what it was.
See how quickly it just vanishes?
That's good. Maybe that was the key.
Well, think of intuition, though, Anthony. If you're relying on a knowing sense, you're probably going to be saying things
Sure.
you don't think of, because you're just going to be expressing them. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you have this sort of background of construction that you're building to be able to say it in the right way. So it comes out in a way that probably is a little more profound, for finding. It's like it's not seeking anymore, because now it's found. So,
Or how about the fact that we
solid.
could never really put a good definition, or I couldn't, on what intuition is. Maybe intuition isn't thinking. We keep saying it's just not thinking.
If you have ever listened to the definition, I've said it 50 times.
It did sound kind of familiar
At
when I was
least.
saying it, I gotta tell you.
Intuition is knowledge beyond reason. Intuition
No,
is
but
knowledge.
that's not the same thing. It's just not even thinking. Not see, that's
Anthony?
what I like.
If you're listening, you're going to hear that. It's knowledge beyond
Hey.
reason. Where is reason
Hey.
made? Where is reason?
Hey guys, Jack, can you see your text while you sit there?
No,
Why not?
I don't
It's
know.
2023.
Because he,
Oh, you mean my texts? Yeah, I don't follow
Yes.
that way. Why? As soon as
But can you see the text I just sent you
now I'm
Sounds
looking at it.
on your
sounds
phone?
pretty good.
I can't see you anymore, but I can see it.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Can you read it?
The ancient Romans identified two major terms which apparently referred to two different kinds of thought processes. We continue to use them today, but in quite different ways. The Latin intellectus referred to the process of thinking while in the awake state. The thinking was based on the physical senses, not
Yeah.
included the senses of emotional feeling, the will, and decision making.
But included.
Oh, but included.
Well,
Okay,
big
yeah.
difference.
Because I was immediately going to say that doesn't seem to make sense. The Latin intuitus was taken, which comes to intuition, Anthony, to refer to anything that did not fit the pattern,
Yeah.
the parameter
The parameters.
of intellectus, but which anyway influenced persons and what happened or was to happen to them. It was considered that intuitus was greater than the individual, but the individuals had a kind of intuitive thought processing capacity.
Yeah.
Some had more of this intuitus than others. And so intuitus was a Roman extension of the great traditions in antiquity regarding shamans, oracles, and seers. So to John's point now, this has been talked about for thousands of years. How long ago were the Romans talking about this? Because I think Plato and Aristotle and Socrates also talked about a priori knowledge, meaning a knowledge that is just known simply. And the definition I use for intuition, Anthony, is knowledge beyond reason. What does that mean? Reasons created in a process of thought. And so is logic. And so is understanding. If those things are created in the process, then that's not intuition, because intuition, they're saying it's somewhat of a process. I don't think it's a process. I think it's an absolute state of knowing we know, period.
Yeah. Good job, John. That's interesting. This is great.
Yeah. But intuition, if it's beyond reason, it's not even beyond reason, because just like an absolute source can't be beyond the relative, it's also within it. So it's where we are, as we are, and that intuition would be the inspiration. It would be that sense of knowing where the words would come and we would say, I didn't even think of that. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know where those words came from. Those sorts of comments are often made when that expression is expressed, until as you get used to it, you begin to realize that you really always had it. You just haven't been utilizing it, because we've been trying to construct the right thought so that we could be right. And the only reason we've been trying to construct it is because we have a sense we're wrong.
So the reason I sent it, Anthony, is because this tradition, was worldwide, and it antedated, Romans and Greeks. It came from Egypt, and it's quite probable that we now specify like clairvoyance, intuition, and telepathy, but they're all housed in the same concept.
Yeah.
And they weren't identified separately.
Right.
Well, I bet you grappling is a lot like intuition. You don't have time to think about what your next move is. It just happens, right? That's intuitive. You just feel your way.
No, you're absolutely wrong.
I mean, it's not that, is what I mean.
It's chess. It's chess under pressure.
Chess under pressure.
Your last comment, though, John, about it being combined is the awareness that it's simultaneous to our experience. It's not something to achieve. It's something we already have.
It's the same concept, and all those things that are lined up, they're not identified separately. So they're all part of the package, exactly the same as the package that you're receiving from the death of your daughter.
Yes.
So if you're open to understanding that it's all part of that same package, anything can happen within that package concerning your daughter.
Well, I would say that it would not be limited to my daughter, but anything.
I'm just using that as your subject today.
Yeah. But in the broader sense, not to limit the scope to the idea that a single death, a single body, all of a sudden becomes a primary focus, but the awareness is that the absolute awareness isn't a narrow focus, it's an absolute inclusion of all things happening simultaneously, spontaneously, and immediately where we are together, not just where I am, not just where you are, but where we are simultaneously together as a species with the universe.
But my point is that we can't separate clairvoyance, out of telepathy, and out of intuition, the word that you use all the time. We can't separate those things because they're coming from that same central point. And just because they radiate out like some spoke on a wheel doesn't mean that we can't touch all of them at the same time.
Well, I would say we are right now. We're just not talking about it because we think our thinking, you say we can't disconnect from them, but we can have thoughts that feel disconnected from them because the thought thinks it's disconnected because the thought isn't thinking about them. The thought's thinking about what it's thinking about them. And that gives a sense of disconnection. It gives a sense of power to thought of having divested itself from something that's impossible to not be a part of. That's the insanity of this whole conversation.
Yeah, that's not why I brought it up, but okay.
Well, help me go a little further than in your description of what it is. It sounds to me that you're talking about the immediacy and the availability and the ever-present state of this totality. Not of it is bits and pieces and parts and things like we talk about in terms of reason and logic and understanding and brain and mind and thought and knowing and intuition and omnipotence and omniscience.
I can give you an example of what I'm saying.
Okay.
So like, just because the air might not be a good vehicle for some kind of telepathy, the water might be a better one. And as you know, I'm a spear fisherman. Enzo, for one, grew up spearfishing with me. Right. So our connection in the water is very, very important because we stay very close and he goes, I go, he goes, I go. But at any time I wanted to, I could say in my mind, telepathically, Enzo, and he would spin around in the water and look at me. Right. Now he could be 100 feet away. He could be, 40 feet below me, 60 feet below me, but he would still spin around because I could communicate with him in that element, right?
Right.
What I'm saying is that there's a big possibility that your connection, and I'm not focused on your death in your family, but there could be a very, very important connection that's still occurring between you and your daughter.
Exactly my point today. If I'm dismissing what you're describing, what I'm missing is the totality of a state of being that is ever present and always aware and always knowing. And what could be a greater trauma to my experience than to dismiss everything in the name of something and everybody and everything in the name of somebody and something? Follow? Because my sense is, John, you're right on it. We are telepathically communicating constantly, but our message is so fucked up and there's so much static and it's so reprehensible that we would telepathically communicate on levels that are so debased that we don't want to admit we even have the capacity because it would be completely hard to hear what we're listening to.
Yeah, and I think the only real difference between the ancient, and the modern ideas of intellect and intuition today is that we think of them as things.
Yes.
While the ancients considered them as information acquisition processes or functions. And we've lost it.
Well, no, I don't think we've lost it. I think we've just clouded it to the point we're not utilizing it because we're preoccupied by thinking in ways that are just not true, period.
Things, we're thinking about things.
Yes. No, these are the interesting thing about the statement, nothing matters, is that in one sense, you would think it's dismissing everything as nothing is not mattering. But in the other sense, it's nothing, meaning the absence of things, matters.
Yeah.
That it actually has substance.
The absence of is it.
So in mathematics, zero, there was more time spent doing mathematics not thinking that zero existed than there has been since the time zero was actually created,
Whoa.
recognized. once zero was created, they could start carrying numbers in as large as they wanted. Before that, they had to have warehouses filled with stone tablets with hash marks on them to account
That's
for
hilarious.
Yeah, that's not true, Jack, but okay.
Well, to a
but
degree,
my point for you,
it's a metaphor for a time when all that was understood was to be able to count. If you had to count 70,000, you had to have hash marks. You had to have ones. There was no zero within the context of modern thought. It
but you
existed.
still, but we're still using the counting system
I know we're using it
from the
with
sewer.
zero, though.
I mean,
with zero, it makes the possibility of being able to calculate things on a single piece of paper in huge numbers without having to store tablets to convey that information. So
People were killed when they invented the zero, right? It was a big problem.
Yeah, they thought it was diabolical. They thought it was devil's work because you could disappear.
Did you know that, John?
yes, but
Okay.
But
because you're shaking your head.
The zero predates your killing of the zero. Once the zero was re-established,
yes,
then yes, they killed.
Yes,
but the only reason I bring this up for you, Jack, and for you, Anthony, that's why I sent that
Thank
quote.
you.
Is that since we think of intellect and intuition as things, we suppose that the ancients thought of it as things, but they didn't. That's the only reason I bring it up.
well, I don't.
And as Jack said, we've forgotten.
Well, we've chosen to forget because it would mean having to account for the responsibility we have in doing it, which would be unlikely for anyone who's making believe that all they are is what they think. That whole premise is a denial of essence, a denial of reality. What kind of thinking would come, but more of the same?
I'm grateful that JP's here, man. At this meeting, I'm just so glad to see you guys, and Lindsay's and Gabe. Grateful for all you guys.
Well, one of the things I don't always know the right words, John, to think of intuition, but I think of intuition as an absolute state of being, which I don't think of as a thing at all.
And that's my point, though. You can't think of intuition. I'm saying intuition is not when you don't think. It's when it's a reflex, when it's something you
can express it, though, Anthony, and that's what thinking is actually designed to do. It's designed to process that sense of knowing in relation to what's happening to allow us to survive at a level well beyond our need so that we can have plenty, given that we've been given so much. We begin to express things in relation to nature rather than in opposition to nature.
So, Anthony, did you like what the Greeks thought of intuitus?
I don't. Oh, you mean that what you texted Jack and he read?
Yes.
The Romans.
I really do. Yeah.
Well, actually, the Romans stole it from the Greeks, but I think it describes it perfectly. Huh? I missed you.
I said that goes back to Aristotle and Socrates and all those guys. It's been talked about for a long time. Yeah.
Hey, John, I need you to help me figure out my problem, though, because I feel a little shame right now and guilt because I have a friend through business that I made more of a friend now, and I invited him to this meeting while we were talking, and I called it a mental obsession meeting. I'm like, oh, yeah, I do. So he said he was going to do something else, eat first. And I feel like, why? It's the name is, the truth is what it is. And I just want to I don't want to call it, man. I want to call it being the great, greatness. Oh, we're attending an incredible meeting. Like whenever I say mental obsession.
But that's not your job. That's Jack's job. It's Jack's show.
Well, I would say it's all of ours. It wouldn't.
No, but Jack and I have spoken about what he calls his show in the past.
But it's a weird part where why am I embarrassed? Like, let's say it's true. Like, and part of it is like, well, I want to sugarcoat it. I want to make it seem like, well, we just call it mental obsession, but really it's more right, or something like that. Why do I need to sugarcoat everything?
I don't know, Anthony. I know. As my son Enzo said, I know a little bit about a lot of things, but when I don't know something, I tell you, I don't know.
That's what Jack says.
Well, I would say you're trying to swallow a bitter pill.
What does that mean? Why? I think if we change the name to something, oh, it's about business success, he'd be on it. He'd be like, okay, well, send me the link right now, like, because that's generic, I guess it's mental obsession. So, but it's not about that. It's about the shame of it. It's like, why do I care now that he thinks that I have a mental...
Exactly. So think of the obsession you have now about that.
Yeah,
Think of the time you're spending about thinking of a name as being so critical.
Well, because it's also because nobody I tell about it goes, oh, really want to do it, right? That's why it's very rare when somebody sticks it out.
If
so I think
everybody wanted to do about it, Anthony, we wouldn't be talking about it. That's the whole point.
Anthony, that I have one word for you. And as an older person, I just focus.
It's a focus group?
No, just focus.
I'm telling you to focus. But Anthony, this isn't a popular conversation.
I wanted it to be more about me. Is what really it is. I'm like, how can I find a way to make the conversation more about me?
Popular conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we're really challenging the whole precept of modern human thought and experience and expression of that thought and the actions we've taken in relation to other humans and nature. And it basically begins to strike at the core of what has been presumed real and true, which it hasn't been. It's just thoughts, thinking about thoughts. And my suspicion is that predated, there were, as you know, JP, that the number of people discussing this back in Greek and Roman times were few compared to the many.
Yeah, because few had exposure to free
The luxury. Yeah, the luxury.
Well, but some of them seem to have a sense when they were young that was pretty clear, that was different, that was willing to challenge, willing to look, and willing to look at what they saw on a essential level rather than
this guy Cornucopius.
What's that?
This guy Cornucopius.
What does that mean?
What's the astronomer? What was his name? Copernicus. That guy had some style.
Yeah, but it's like, Jack talks about Aristotle, like those guys, they traveled. They spoke to like very, very old people in Egypt. They talked about what predated them and what they thought then and how things were created. So they had a foothold into something that to others seemed new.
So we here are now with all they did as a result. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? If we have choices that we can make in relation to our human experience, and the choices we're making are diminished by the thoughts we have in relation to reality and truth, which would be the most fundamental aspects of life and existence, and they're wrong, what's going to come out of that? But a collision of thoughts, and as a result, people and cultures and ideas and all of the sort of depreciated actions that I think we're witnessing on a scale that's becoming more obvious. I don't know how large it is compared to how large it used to be, but I think it's becoming more obvious because we have so many different, ESP, in addition to your other telepathic mentions, we've kind of created an ability to communicate through the same thing that we're using today, which is really a manifestation of a pre-existing natural condition, to your point, JP. This is now, we've manifested because we can make money off of it.
Oh, so I didn't know where you were going with that.
And we can take credit for it and say, look at what I did. People say they discover things in the universe. There's no secrets in the universe. What is there to discover? Except we've begun to think that being able to utilize something that's already existed becomes us doing it rather than us finally aligning ourselves with an awareness that there is a lot of energy that we can express and a lot that we can do naturally that's very, very productive and abundant because it's actually our nature. It's not something.
I got a question you couldn't answer about the universe, probably, Jack, that you don't know, or I'd like to know the answer. Have you heard of the 20-80 rule?
I don't think so.
The 20%, there's the 20% of your employees are doing 80% of the business, or your closet. There's a 20-80 rule.
Anthony, you're again
Focus.
going off on some
Focus.
other.
Focus.
Yeah, but no, here's what I'm saying. So let me finish the point. Have you heard of this rule?
Yes,
So how does the universe, if there's this rule, the 20, how does the
but it
universe?
isn't a rule. It's a thought somebody had that
You just said you heard of the rule.
I heard
That's
of what you're saying.
Don't
I've
you
heard
believe it's
some-
true? Do you don't believe it's true?
Why would I need to believe in it if it was truth? It would just be happening, and it would be all that was.
It is.
happening.
I
wouldn't-
think it is. I
Okay.
guess if you don't believe in it, it doesn't make sense.
I don't believe in it, Anthony, but point is that I just want you to focus, that's all.
I'll have to do more.
Anthony,
Actually, I don't know.
There's
I don't know how
probably
true the rule is. I just kind of took it as true.
no, because you're constantly seeking other people's thoughts to glom onto and think they've finally figured it out because you feel lost because your focus is constantly on your own thinking. And I'm not saying constantly, Anthony, because at the same time I can say that, you're absolutely completely aware of something. You just deny and resist and ignore because you're so preoccupied in that manic sort of search. I've done that most of my life. I'm not talking about it as something you're doing exclusively, but it's certainly something I've witnessed enough to mention, frankly, so that maybe you look at it and say, wow, maybe that's what I'm doing in terms of that distraction that I'm constantly. I don't know how many things you email me during the day with little quotes on them that seem to be a search for the answer, the thing. There's nothing lost in the answer. Nothing. It's already here. If it's already here and you keep looking, where's the problem? Is it in reality and truth that's already here? Or is it in your seeking to think you're going to find it as though it's missing? If you think it's not here and you're seeking for it, you're never going to find it. Can't be anywhere else if it's infinite.
I only seek it 20% of the time, though, is interesting.
Not on this,
Anthony,
not in this program.
Anthony, if you choose to talk about business anymore right now, I'm gonna sign off.
Okay, I'm just putting it on mute, but I wasn't talking about business.
If you
Can I say
Okay.
something?
Yeah,
you can
Jack,
say anything you want.
of course. Clearly.
I would like to share that I think the purpose of having this beautiful meeting, a very smart meeting, that connection, that energy, that wisdom is for each other to grow a little bit. Sometimes we are wrong with our thought, but everything starts when we realize that being honest, being open to ourselves and living this life open, being flexible, and to connect with the peace that everyone is looking for. So I love this meeting because we can express whatever we are thinking and we can help each other to figure it out. Like energy, like atoms, like the universe, everything is together. They are helping each other. So that is why I love this meeting. I don't know everything, but we are together. We can help each other. The beginning of transformation is to be aware that, okay, I am thinking this way, and you help us to figure it out. Yes.
Well, my sense is it's only thinking that's ever wrong. To JP's point earlier about the intuitive and the intellectus being, they're not really things, since they're basically imagery. They're not. I would say the thinking in a brain is a thing because it's happening within a relative process, but the intuition that's intimately involved is an ever-present state of being. If it isn't a thing because it doesn't function in the world of time and space and the universe of time and space that we talk about a lot and think about a lot, because that's how we're designed to function as humans. But it doesn't mean our being nature is being served by making believe all we are is thinking about those limited thoughts, rather than starting to see that our knowing nature is never wrong. It's what we think about it that's wrong. And in that regard, if the thing we're seeking, this goes back to you too, Anthony, and you just mentioned the word, so I pointed out, if we think we're looking for something, we're simultaneously admitting that thing we're looking for isn't where we are. And if something's infinite, it's got to be where we are constantly, always. It can't be anywhere else because there is nowhere else. In a present state of being, there is no place else. And if we're always in a present state of being, simply thinking about other things, that doesn't mean other things are out there. It means we're thinking about things that aren't happening here because we're making it up. We're just thinking about things the way we think about them, which is complete makeup.
Everything's
Jack.
made up.
Jack, I am thinking something interesting. If thoughts are very dangerous,
If what?
that our thoughts are thinking, yes, they are, sometimes they drive us to bad decisions, bad
No.
behaviors.
No,
Sometimes,
we choose to use them, just like if you got into a car and did 180 miles an hour and ran into another car. That isn't the
Okay.
car's problem. That's
yes,
your
yes,
choice.
we choose. Yes, exactly. That right word is we choose that. So
Yes.
intuition help us to stop, right? To say, don't do this. Don't do that.
It helps us recognize when we're wrong by the sentient responses we're getting in our body. So our body language is actually telling us how well we're doing in relation. Our thinking is thinking for the body for the most part. My thinking isn't thinking about your body. I mean, it may, but it's my thoughts about your body that I'm thinking of, not really your body, until I start recognizing, oh, if I'm thinking the lens of my thoughts is all that her body is and all that her face is and all that I see, then I'm not really seeing you until I start saying, oh, there is a body there that doesn't need me to see it to be. And I start seeing you a lot more clearly because I'm not seeing you according to the dictates of my limited thoughts. And the other essence is, the other beautiful essence is that this other being nature is invisible to us in terms of this seeming experience we're having. And it's also indivisible because it can't be in pieces if it's whole. It can't be this and that, there and then, any of those things that we use as terms within our own discussion. It's just is what it is, as it is. It isn't even is what it is as it is, period. All the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. And the present, I suspect, isn't even in time, because the infinitesimal amount of time it takes for a time to change is so small that there is no change whatsoever in terms of that point. So the moment is always new, meaning everything's always possible. And if we miss that in our thinking, doesn't mean we have to think about it all the time for it to be. If you begin to concede that it already is what it is, regardless of what we think, now thinking at least is following the lead, taking the lead rather than trying to be the leader. And so instead of being backward and opposing reality, it's starting to concede, oh, I'm already of reality. I'm already a fish in water. I don't have to understand water to be in it. And every time I flap my tail, I seem to be able to swim. That's good enough. I get it. I'm here. It is there. Whatever it is isn't just me flapping my tail, but it's a combination of my interaction with the water that allows me to move and start to see that this is, as JP was talking about, an absolutely integrated, synchronistic, seamless reality that we are all of as humans, but we are all it as beings. We are of it as it is. We may have separate souls, we may have separate identities in that regard, but the source of that, those things then too, is the exact same thing.
Yes.
So grasping that and talking about it, well, you don't have to grasp it because it would suggest it could get away. But talking about it tends to open up thoughts because they're coming from a place that isn't built on thought upon thought. It's built on a sense of knowing. So the thoughts begin to express things in words because thoughts precede words, like thoughts precede all very voluntary actions. Starts to allow the words to begin to happen in a way that seem to be a little more illuminating to that being nature, that knowing nature, so that we can sit here together and have a witness that maybe there is something greater than what I think is there. Maybe I don't need to think about it at all to know it. Maybe thinking is irrelevant to that knowing, which would suggest that we're not just bodies, we're not just brains, we're not just thinkers.
Awareness, ¿cómo se dice?
What's that?
I am trying to figure it out how I say awake. Awareness
Awareness?
is, yes, is intuition, right?
Yes,
Being
I would
aware,
say.
yes.
Yes,
So
I would
that
say.
is so important. When we are awake, we know intuition. So intuition
it's-
is good.
Knowing awareness is omniscience. And it's omnipotence and it's omnipresence. They all become the same thing, as JP was pointing out. We talk about them in separate ways to give a little context to it, but ultimately they're all the same thing. There is no division in there whatsoever if it's indivisible. So it can't be here and there, then and then or now. Even here and now is something. An absolute state of being isn't here and now because it's not. It's everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It's just a state of being that doesn't, it just happens to be in our experience because it must be where everything is, regardless of whether it's a thing or no thing. It just is a present state of being. So we think of here and now because our bodies are functioning within the time space dynamic or dimension.
Yes.
And yet, to JP's point again, humans are the ones that have divided the dimensions into the first, second, third dimension, et cetera, sixth dimension, seventh dimension. We're trying to figure it out as though it's not figured out until we think about it. If we were thinking it was already figured out and we already know it, and then started looking at it, we would have a much more intuitive relationship to it to admit through our thinking than a process of elimination within the thinking about it as though we don't know it. And that's what Einstein used to talk about doing, was going to his study and returning to the mind of a 9-year-old, he said, when everything was fascinating and he didn't have the limitations of thoughts that were in collision with seeming reality, or seeming the thoughts that he thought were real were in collision with absolute reality, which they can't be. We can think of it that way, though. We can experience it that way as humans, but they aren't in collision. You can't be in collision with reality. You can't be opposed to it. You can think you are, just like you can think you're not in the present. It doesn't mean you're not in the present. It means you're in the present thinking you're not in the present. So the thing about the absolute is that it confirms itself by anything you do with it, which is why it's not opposite, which thinking is. If we're wrong in our thinking, what is confirmed for us is that we feel unstable and we feel disillusioned, which suggests it's illusion. We're disillusioned and we feel unhappy and we feel disturbed and we feel discomfort and all that kind of stuff. Our body is saying to us, you're creating the experience. This is what you want. Keep going. You're welcome to it. You're free to do it.
It's very interesting that as human being, we sometimes we need to take decisions, big decisions, could be personal life or business. And I know now that 100% we had to be aware about intuition, because in the business world, we have to see things, because if not, it will be a big problem.
So let me mention to you,
Yes.
what if, here's the big if of this conversation,
Yes.
we're already aware. If we're thinking we're not aware because we're thinking we're not aware, we think thinking is more infinite than infinite. It can't be. So it must be, my experience, we are aware, we do know, we just simply think we don't know because we're still reliant and addicted to the thinking about the thinking we need to get there rather than realize we are there. We are, as a result, our own existence is based in reality. It's the premise of it is reality. Existence is the basis of our existence. Life is the basis of life. It isn't something that's optional. It's not something that's convertible. It's not something we can trade in and out of. But we can think we do, which shows how free we are to allow our thinking to manifest the effects that we end up experiencing, which are the consequences and the circumstances and the situations. the interactions with people, the interreactions with people. We're actively engaged in all those things. So when you think of having to be there, if we have that already, think of the way we use the word have. It's like a demand. We have to do it. Having something to do is very different than having to do something. If you think of the context, if I have it, if it's just the nature of my existence, I don't have to do anything about it to have that. What does that mean? I can do anything. And if I can do anything and I keep doing things that are sick and crazy and insane and driving me nuts, why would I do that if I were healthy? I wouldn't. There's clearly some lack of health in that process, mental health. Making believe what I'm thinking is true, what I'm thinking is real, and all that exists is what I'm thinking. So I need to be, I'm mourning the loss, the seeming loss of an infinite, absolute state of love and knowing, where there's no conflict, there's no lack of support, there's no lack of abundance. None of that stuff would ever even exist. Wouldn't even be thought of because it wouldn't be, it's like that knowing doesn't think, it just knows. What would it have to think about it if it knows everything? Nothing. So if that's the consensus, or if it's a consideration that it's already that way and you've been thinking it isn't, then simply considering it and starting to live with the consideration that you already know it will make, if this is true, if it's accurate, it would be expected to make some sort of major shift in your thinking, because it would relieve your thinking of trying to do what it can't possibly do and begin to express what it's naturally designed to do without you even thinking about it, to Anthony's point. Now you're not thinking about it at all. You're just letting it express it. You're letting it determine how to go ahead and speak. And your intention is actually now free to begin to see that you're manifesting all of the results you're experiencing, all of the circumstances and all of the situations are all basically reflections of your own thinking about what's going on. So this isn't about trying to not think. It's about starting to see that we're actually the ones choosing the thinking we're doing, and we're responsible for it. And it's a choice that we make. It is not something that we are condemned to do until we start thinking about it as something that we can't do, shouldn't do, have to do. All those kind of other things give us a sense that we're not free to do it. It's not because we're not free. It's because we're creating the environment to think that. So what do? Feel condemned, feel upset, feel like we have to overcome it, get away from it, get out of it. While in fact, all we're doing is trying to get out of the thing we continue to create by making believe there's something to get out of. It's just delusion. It's a dream. If we're waking up with our eyes open, it's starting to see that we've been dreaming narratives are reality, and the narratives are based in the thinking we're doing. We can do it, and we're free to do it. Imagination is one of our greatest assets, but we've turned it into a huge liability. And we haven't actually turned it into it. We've turned our experience of it into a liability where it feels impossible to escape. That's because we've written a horror film that just doesn't end. It's not even sequels. It's just kind of going on and on and on chronically because we're addicted to the idea. Addiction's the idea that we can turn something that doesn't work into something that works, that we can turn a problem into a solution, that we can turn false into truth or truth into false, that all it is what we think about it and there's nothing more to that, when all it is a manifestation. Thinking doesn't manifest reality, it manifests effects. And the effects are the body language, the disturbance, the discomfort, distress, all those kind of things, the oh me, oh my, I feel like I'm being driven crazy. We don't have to be driven to be where we are to feel crazy. And the feelings are accurate if you start listening to them that way. They're telling us about our thinking. They're not telling us about reality. They're not telling us about each other. They're telling us about what we're doing with our thinking. If I feel wrong and bad and distressed and all that, my thinking is wrong and bad and distressed, period. It's very close to home per se, because it's where we're all homing in on our own experience, our own ability to think and witness and be a part of this dynamic that seems huge to us when we think, oh, we are our little people. But it doesn't seem huge when you begin to realize that in an infinite state, the infinite doesn't feel big. It just is what it is. It doesn't feel at all. It doesn't think. It doesn't try to quantify. It's not comparing. It's not contrasting. It's not analyzing. Just a state of being that's very difficult to talk about, but I expect we can address it in certain ways that give a vastness to it that begins to exceed the thinking we do of it. And the reminder that any thinking we do that's limited has always got a defensive limit to it. There's always a fight against it and always a fear of letting go of that. Why? Because we think it's reality. It's not.
Where are, ¿cómo se dice? I want to know if you know where those fantasies and I don't know how to call those, but where they are coming from, how that is, yeah, where they are coming from, those fantasies, or yeah, where we have so many things going on, where are they coming? Sí, ¿de dónde?
My thoughts are on that, and I don't say this as though it's a final answer in any way, because it's just a thought that I'm having in relation to what you're asking. But if the premise of our thinking, the beliefs we have, JP has talked about this, beliefs are collections of ideas that we have to try and find truth as though it's missing. So we believe in something, we have faith in something, we have hope in something. All of those things admit that we don't believe and we don't have faith and we have no hope. We're trying to have those things because we don't have it in relation to the thinking we're doing. The fundamental, if the fundamental nature of our thinking is nature, and this goes back to JP's point about the intuition and intellect not being separate, but being intimate. If I'm thinking about my thinking as something separate from that, and I have to get to the most profound aspect of knowing, that's again making believe thinking has nothing to do with knowing, rather than seeing that thinking is a product of knowing. It's a byproduct of it. So I'm creating a nightmare. I'm creating an impossibility in my own thinking by going backward, by turning it around. And it's been done so long, we look at other people and think, well, if that's all everybody does, that's the only thing I can do. Which is why we seem to be so clear about what's wrong with everybody else. You hear people say, oh, well, everybody does this. I don't know what everybody's doing, but I figure that everybody's doing whatever they're doing. And to that degree, I can speak to everybody accurately. If I was thinking about what they were doing more specifically, I couldn't possibly address everybody, because everybody's doing it. Even if they're doing the same thing, they're doing it in their own way. In some way, we each have the capacity to develop an imagery that's specific to the thinking we're doing, not specific to everybody else. Doesn't make us separate. It just makes us able to have free choice to guide our brain wherever we want to, largely in favor of the body, hopefully. That would be the goal. The instinctive goal is to survive and to thrive, not to die young and kill off other people and think everything is scarce, when in fact, we wouldn't. If everything was scarce, we wouldn't have anything today, given the amount of stuff we've consumed. And there seems to be enough. It's not being spread around very well, but there seems to be enough. So my sense is, when the premise is wrong and the underlying aspect of our thinking is the thinking we don't think we're thinking, which we call our subconscious, then that thinking we're aware of by having those thoughts that you're describing show up as though we have nothing to do with them, and they seem to be coming from somewhere unknown, because we're trying to claim that that subconscious isn't something we know anything about. While we're calling it subconscious openly, we're talking about it, so we clearly recognize it. And why not say, I know what's there, I don't want to admit it. I think it's in the dark, so it isn't there. I'm ignoring it. I'm pretending I don't have anything to do with it. That's that lurking sensation. That's that place that stuff seems to be hidden and that we're afraid to have appear. Why are we afraid? Because it tells us we've been lying. We have been misrepresenting. Yeah.
They came from the subconscious.
Okay, but here's the subconscious. Thinking I'm doing that I want to be irresponsible for, and think that I'm not doing. I'm setting that up. I'm saying this feels uncomfortable and I don't know what it is, so I'm going to pretend I don't have anything to do with it, rather than saying I can't be feeling it if I don't have something to do with it. I can't be witnessing of it if I'm not involved in it. I can't exist if I'm aware of something. That's what I'm saying. In fact, I can't be aware of something if I don't exist. I can't be feeling it if I'm not creating it. Wouldn't happen. If I was completely numb and in a coma, I would not be depressed. I would not have the potential for depression. So lenses, you're new.
Yes.
MK is relatively new. If in these words you recognize that there is a state of your awareness that seems to be confirmed, meaning that you can't even put words to it, you can't even put thoughts to it, but you have a sense that something's right and it becomes laughable almost. That's you being aware of your awareness. It's you starting to notice that that thing isn't somewhere else, it's here.
Yes.
And that's if we have a goal here, that's the goal, is to get a little better at starting to say,
Yes.
this present knowing is always present and it's always knowing, and I'm always aware that I'm aware, and I always know that I know. And it isn't I that know, because the I, the capital I, ends up being us. We all know, we know. We're all aware we're aware. Now I'm not at odds with anybody because I'm actually inclusively considering them all the time. I don't even have to know them to know that whoever they are, I'm including. Whoever, wherever, whenever, whatever, however, I'm including them, period. I'm not thinking about them specifically in detail. I'm thinking about them generally, including all the detail and leaving the detail to them. They can have whatever thought they want. I'm considering them from an absolute essence that's essential, rather than a divisive, indivisible state that I say I don't have anything to do with because I can't see it.
Mhm.
Start to say, oh, okay, well, now my thinking changes a lot because I start realizing I can affect all these people one way or the other. Now my real responsibility, which isn't a negotiation, it's not optional, it's just a state of existence, is responsible for existence. So we must be responsible for our existence, and we must be responsible for all existence at the same time, meaning we, you and I, and everyone else affects everyone else and everything. I'm not doing it alone because I've taken that responsibility, and you're not. You're irresponsible because you haven't. We're all responsible doing it, whether we think so or not. So everybody's affected by it all. So if you think you don't make a difference, that's another thought that would be wrong. You make all the
we
difference.
are. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if we
Yeah,
talk
it's true.
individually as though it's me and not you, then we got a lot of work to do. If we start talking collectively as it being all of us, there's nothing we can do, because you start realizing that's all we're doing right now. To JP's point earlier, we're just acting dysfunctionally because the basis of our thinking is dysfunctional. Doesn't mean the basis of our being is dysfunctional, because it doesn't function at all. It simply is the absolute state of all possibility. And what we're doing in our human experience is trying to turn impossibility into possibility and wondering why we're struggling.
Good point. Mm-hmm.
But that awareness here, not so
Mhm.
much the words, but that sense of,
Yeah.
what I found is I started breathing deeper. I started sitting up straighter. I started being conscious of my posture and my position and my movements, and my body became more evident to me, rather than feeling depressed and heavy, and my back was hurting and my shoulders. All of a sudden it became a tool. It became my vehicle, and I wanted it to be tuned up, get an oil change, have the tires, put air in the tires so I could get better mileage out of it. I don't do it all in every way at all. I just do what I can as I do, because whatever I do is what I can do. That's it. It's over. When it's over, it's over. Because it's always starting new. I've always got the potential to re-choose, restart. And if what I'm doing is restarting to choose impossibility, it isn't addiction tends to be thought of as something that needs to be stopped, rather than looked at as something that is constantly restarted. And when you see it from that point of view, you start realizing I have no freedom. I have no reason to continue doing this other than the reasons I make up that I think are the only reasons I need to do it. And they're just made up. When I do it and then act on that reactive cycle, I think I'm stuck in the cycle because I've given up the seeming responsibility for having done anything about it, for having created it. And it's the starting of it, the restarting of it right now that creates the opinion that I need to stop it. When in fact, I continue to restart it, wondering why I can't stop it. Thinking the effect, again, backwards, the effect is the cause and the cause becomes the effect. Rather than say, no, the cause is my thinking, the effect is what I'm feeling and how I'm acting. So like that, it's gone. Why? Because it's been a delusion the whole time. It's just been an idea that I can turn something false into truth if I continue to think about it more and more and more and focus on it more and more and more and do it longer and longer and longer. Someday it'll be true. Never now. And now is the only place. There is no someday in the ever-present state of now.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that when I am concerned about something and I talk about it, something happened on my brain. It's like, or I'm not worried about it anymore, or I learned something that made me feel happy, on peace. So yeah, talking is very important. Yeah.
Well, in my experience, which again I share, there's lots of experience out there, so everybody gets to rely on their seeming own. But understanding, if you think of the one thing we don't tend to see with our eyes is substance. We see, if somebody's cut in half, you tend to see the guts and the gore and all the stuff of the inside of their body. But for the most part, we don't see substance. We see the superficial form, the exterior, right? So think of understanding and substance. They're both words referring to how we are standing. What's under our feet? Understanding. What substance beneath our feet? The earth is beneath our feet, typically.
Mm-hmm.
The earth is pretty solid, pretty stable. We can choose whether we want to walk or not. We can choose whether we want to trip or not. We can choose whether we want to walk forward or backward. But if the earth is solid, here's that point about the subconscious. The subconscious would also be unseen under our consciousness, supposedly. But if that's where the dark is, and we think because it's dark we can't see things, understanding is in fact how we see things that are invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And we start to see that, bodies do have substance. So if thoughts have no substance, they have no point. They have no existence. They have no denominator. There's a zero at the bottom, and it means there's nothing there but a thought thinking there's something there. We don't struggle with reality. We struggle with the idea that continuing to think about what's wrong is reality. And as a result, think we need to keep doing it more and more and more. And that's the mental obsession. That's, Anthony, why people don't like this conversation when you mention mental obsession. Because, first of all, mental obsession is redundant because the only obsessions are mental. But it makes the point again that when we're doing the redundancy of thinking that a thought that is untrue can be true by thinking about it more, we think reality, we think thoughts are the creator of reality, which means we become the creator of all reality, not some reality. And all of a sudden we become very, very shy and sensitive about other people who don't think like we do and think that what we need to do is kill them to save ourselves or hate them in some way or get away from them. And so what do? Exactly what we do with the thoughts we think we don't want to be responsible for. We get distance from them. We go away. We make them invisible. I don't ever want to.
And that is not good.
Well, it can
sometimes
help. It can help if you're literally going to be attacked by somebody because they're so upset to keep some distance. But ultimately, to act on that basis is doing exactly what we're doing with our own thoughts. When we think we hide them in the dark, we think that person is no longer there by getting distance from them and staying. I hear people say, I'm trying to stay away from toxic people. And I say, well, it's tough to get away from your own experience that's toxic. Because we're not running from other people. We're running for what we're doing that we're unwilling to change. or that
Or
we're
what we have, or what we have on our subconscious, like bad experiences, unpleasant experiences, and we met other energies. We will call people energies. Those energies are negative. So sometimes we prefer to be away. I think that way sometimes.
So do I. And my suspicion, because you came in talking about trauma, my suspicion is there's no greater trauma that we can impose on our experience than to make believe who we are is not actually who we are. And as a result, that we are the creators of reality, which is believing there is no reality and truth other than our own. We couldn't be more isolated, more at odds with reality than to make believe that we are the creators of it, rather than we are capable of manifesting effects. And we tend to like the effects that are productive and that are helpful and that are good for everyone. We tend not to like the effects that are just good for us, ultimately. At first, they seem great because in our own little world, we seem to be happy. But as time passes, we get further and further and further away from others because we keep thinking that what we're doing is right, so right that we should be doing it exclusively and we should be doing it alone. And that pretty much defines an addictive tendency: alcoholism, drug addiction, food, gambling, whatever it is. People tend to find themselves very much alone after a while. They think it's right, but because it's wrong, they keep getting further and further and further away from the natural connection we all have. And the fact is, they're still connected. They're just disconnected in their thinking. Their thinking thinks they're disconnected. And that's the mental obsession. That's the disease,
Thank you.
the mental disease.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you so much for saying that. It's so important, because no matter what happened, we have to be authentic. No matter what kind of bad or unpleasant experiences we had, we need to be authentic. We need to be us, no matter what. And anyway, we're around negative and positive, so it's part of our naturaleza. Naturaleza. ¿Cómo se dice? Naturaleza is
Natural?
Yes,
Yeah.
sí.
Yeah.
Mhm.
See.
So yeah. So wow, this
Okay,
is
but
why.
now
Wow.
I'm going to pinpoint a little something for you to think about this next week or to contemplate and consider. We don't need to do it. We don't have to do it.
Mhm.
We don't have to be authentic. We don't need to be authentic.
We are.
We are, yes, and as beings, we are authentic, so we can't change that at all. But we don't have to be in thinking. The problem becomes when we think we have to do something that we're unwilling to do, we've created a collision. So you know what we're going to do? Keep doing the thing we think we have to stop doing, or start doing the thing that seems to be impossible to ever do, rather than say, it's a choice and I'm free to make it. When I realize that I can be as bad as I want and I can be as good as I want, the choice becomes clear as to what I'm doing is a responsibility of my own choosing. And if I'm living with it comfortably, the chances are I may want to do more of that, unless I've got some other thing I'm lying about and cheating about and thinking about that I end up wanting to convert the new thing into, so that I can say again, now I'm condemned in a broader way. That whole pot gets stirred. So when we feel free, we actually notice what's wrong that feels condemned much. If we're not reckoning with it accurately and authentically, we're going to think of it as something to get away from. And so that freedom we just created is going to be contaminated by a preoccupation of needing and having, and I must do, and I can't do anything else. And that's addiction.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if you embrace the wrong and recognize you're welcome to do it, absolutely. Then the question is, and I've heard too many people say this to think that it's not common amongst us, why would I do that? I'm saying, very good question. Good question. Now you thinking it was the only thing you could do, so you didn't even think about it. And it became a knee-jerk automatic reaction over and over and over again. Habituation, rather than, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I bother doing that? And the thing that seemed to be possible all of a sudden is
Thanks,
wrong.
Jeff.
Wow. Yes. I love it.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yes.
the source
This is
of love.
transformation. This is transformation.
Yes.
This is love. Exactly. That is the key. Love.
Yes. Now, I would say love
Oh my
doesn't
God.
transform, it just transmits. It just conveys through us because it's sort of like the energy field and all those other things. We don't see the X-rays and the gamma rays and the radio waves and all that, but we hear them and we
Yes.
sense them in a microwave when the food gets hot. They're there. We don't have to see them for them to work. So it's starting to say, I don't have to see anything for it to exist visually, and I don't have to understand it for it to exist. And as I
It's
start to
there.
see that and recognize that, the knowing nature of my thinking is employed in a direct alignment with it rather than in one that's trying to overcome it, fight it, and replace it. So then, and that's intuition, Anthony, too, to
That
JP's
is
point. Just
amazing.
as soon as we are thinking in terms that are aligned with what's actually happening, and it's not too hard to do it because we don't have to think about it specifically to think about it generally to include everybody and everything. Thinking automatically starts getting better because it's doing what it's designed to do rather than what we've insisted it do that it can't do. So now possibility becomes possible. And the possibility of impossibility is a lot less likely because it will be obvious when we start that we're heading in a direction that is never going to be achieved and will at some point come to a very, very dark end the further and further and further and longer and longer and longer we maintain the delusion that somehow we're going to get there when in fact we're already there with everything. We've already got it. So
That is a very powerful mindset.
do you
Yes.
see? But now
Yes.
let's take the mindset out of it and just notice that that's the state of mind that's natural. Now, if you have it, you don't have to set it. It's already there. There's no setting of it.
Yes.
When you think of it as being there as it is, your thinking starts to actually become much more dynamic. So it's not set. It's actually free to do it all, everything, anytime. And all of a sudden you will start saying things and doing things you didn't think you could do, and nor would you think to say. You'll start seeing it happen in ways where you go, oh, I would never have thought of that. I would never have even seen that if it was in front of me. Because you'll realize you've been seeing this stuff all along and you've been doing everything you can to ignore it. And ignoring things is the basis of ignorance, not intelligence.
Wow.
Sensitivity is the basis of our intelligence. It's being aware and sensitive to what's going on. We can feel overwhelmed in our sensitivity because what's happening is our limited thoughts are being overwhelmed by the actual stimulus that's happening. But it doesn't mean we are overwhelmed. It means our thinking is overwhelmed. But we've attached who we are with what we think, and we think our thinking defines us when our thinking really defines what we think. No more. So when we start thinking in absolute terms, now we have a chance of actually identifying ourselves accurately, and there's no reason to do it because we recognize the true self can't be found because it's never been lost. And that we all share it. It's not something I have and you don't because I saw it and you didn't. You still have it, you just don't think you do. Now thinking gets very small, like a speck of dust, compared to being everything. It just is something we do. Just, oh, well, you can have that thought, sure. And it's not permanent, no matter how many times you repeat it, because the present is always present. It's always you're always newly able to re-choose whatever you want to do. Always. So the freedom's always there. The responsibility is always there. The choice is always there within the confines, the seeming confines of a human experience.
Yes. And that is why these kind of meetings are important. That is why.
Well,
Yes.
let's take it beyond the time we spend. There's 168 hours in a week. We spend 2 of those hours. That means there's 166 hours in the week to be able to begin to apply this thinking and start to say, what am I doing in my experience to be creating the things I don't think I want? And if you start looking at your experience, I will suggest to you that everything you don't think you want that's happening are all things you're denying you have anything to do with. So you're thinking it's because of them, it's because of then, it's because of their. It's not here, it's not now. It's all stories and some other past and future, some inevitability about somebody else doing something else somewhere else with someone else. Not here, not now. Why? Because we've gone back into the denial of making believe we can escape the moment, that we can be irresponsible for the present. It's impossible. So we feel life becomes impossible. People become impossible. Situations become impossible. Why? Because we're looking through a lens of impossibility. That's all we're going to see. As long as we maintain it, that's what we're going to see. When you start to see that, you can say, I want to think impossible things. I want to see everything as impossible. And you will. But you will quickly say, why would I want to see limited possibility when I could actually see all possibility and start expressing that in ways that are well beyond the capacity of the limited nature of trying to eke something out, rather than say, I already got everything. I'm already affecting everything. I just don't like the effects I'm seeing. I'm gonna do it from a point of view that is not even a point, but just a view that's clear, and start to actually express that. And then the potential of the possibility for all humans becomes very simple and very quick and very easy and very possible. Not surprising. So if that's what we're here to do, and we've got bodies to do it, it would seem we might as well. We might as well focus on well-being rather than just saying we're fine when we don't feel like it and don't think we are, and trying to just basically come to a quick conclusion. I love my daughter. I love both of my daughters. I miss her, and I don't want to compromise my memory of her by making believe that whatever that totality of her existence is the same one we all share. And it would be to diminish her and dismiss her as having had any part of it, to make believe that somehow, because her body and her thoughts aren't active the way I've known them, means that she is no longer available in some way, in some place, in some essence. Maybe not in a place not in a where and a when, but in an essence that is the same one that JP described in terms of that intuitive knowing. There's something going on here that seems to be well beyond our thoughts, and to dismiss it is to dismiss the majority of what's happening, if not all that's happening, in the name of the few things we think are happening. And I would say that's a very, very diminished approach to the capacity we have that would be abundant and inclusive and at peace and at rest in the nature of nature, knowing what to do in ways that would be beneficial and insightful and adventurous, and a sense of exploration and adventure and spontaneity and awe and inspiration would naturally become the state of our expression from the thinking we do. So we have 166 hours to go out and see how to do that. So a lot of it comes from interacting with people, just starting to see that people are okay. They just don't think they are. Big difference when you begin to give them credit for being okay, and then realize they may not think that well. Because now you share something with them that you may do too, and it becomes a lot easier to appreciate and have compassion for them than to think of them as contemptful and spiteful and hateful and somebody to stay away from, when all they're doing is really giving you a window into your own hate and spite for the self you think you are, based on the thoughts you're doing that are spiteful and hateful and contemptful. So more practice, the better we get. It's just an exercise. And if we've been exercising the illness for as long as we have and making believe it's the only thing we can do, and it isn't even true, imagine how quickly we'll get used to the idea of actually expressing something that never changes and is always available and doesn't cause conflict and isn't in bits and pieces and is completely whole and absolute in its nature. Wherever we are, it is. Whatever we are, we are. We are a source in that. That's our source. That's our essence. And essence is essential. It's not an option. It's not a negotiation. It's not something we need to do. We don't have to do anything. We don't must, shall, any of that. There's none of that. No demand in it at all. It's just present, always. Anything else?
We'll be obsessively thinking about you and your daughter again.
Thank you, Gabe. Me too. And I think in this other sense that knowing nature is that we know. And if we do, then we also know those things we think we need to think about to reinforce. But we don't. We'll just naturally do it in a way that might be more accommodating to the essence of our experience rather than the sort of fractured state of our thinking about it. But I appreciate that, Gabe. And I appreciate your participation in this and our weekly walks and the challenges, because same with JP, it gives me a chance to bounce off of what I'm doing. I don't want to be so fixed in my thoughts that I think I'm right when in fact it isn't about my thinking. It's about your capacity to begin to experience your own knowing nature and have it pass through your thinking. That's the goal here. So I don't want to be right, and I certainly want to admit where I'm wrong most of the time, but I don't always see it immediately. It takes me a minute sometimes, a week sometimes, whatever it is. But I want to correct it, and I want to refine it, and I want to refine the words so that they are more apt to suggest what we're talking about.
I
So
love it, Jeff. Thank you.
yeah. So anyway, that's what we do together, and I appreciate that you guys come and to a degree you suffer through this, to the degree that any of this challenges the predispositions and sense of dispossession. There's a challenge there. I know that. I deal with it all the time, and I deal with the conversation a lot too, because there's a lot of people say I'm obsessed with the obsession, but my sense is it isn't really an obsession, it's an inspiration. And there's a very big difference between doing something obsessively that is a suicidal tendency and something that's inspirational, that's actually looking at life and asking how we can be better in this life form for each other. And that's what I would rather participate in. Whether I do that all the time or not, I'm not always sure, but I have some certainty in that.
I can see that. I can see that, Jack. Clear.
Thank you. I love that we can do it on Zoom.
Yes.
See it.
Yes.
Digitally from anywhere. So anyway, Gabe, that I appreciate your thoughts and in our conversation. So we will continue.
We'll talk this week, I'm sure.
Yeah. Love you guys. Thank you so much. It helps me now, and I've got a lot of work to do. That's a brand new way of looking at the world, given my granddaughter and the responsibility, and also everybody wanting to do the best they can now, both in tribute to her mother and as an augment to whatever her mother might have thought in the most ideal sense. We're going to do our best to operate on that basis in favor of this young child who is just growing into her experience, having had something so difficult to face. She even said the other night, which was, a great bit of insight on her part. She'd been quiet all day after she heard and went sort of numb. But she said to my ex-brother-in-law's wife, who's a sweetheart and had us in their home and took care of us for 3 days while we waited for my sister to come back, Ruby said, I know now that everybody's coming that something's actually happened. She said, I don't want to believe it. She said, I just don't want to believe it yet. So she was really exercising her freedom to say, I don't even know what to do with it. And had the capacity at 13 to mention it. It was the only thing she'd said all day. She was silent for the most part, other than saying fine all the time. But she was coming to terms with it, and she was seeing all the relatives starting to show up. And while they hadn't, she felt, maybe this is just a dream. Maybe this is just a story. Maybe this is something that didn't happen. And it started to dawn on her. And then when they took her back to her apartment a day later or so, she said that she'd lived in with her mother, and it wasn't lavish by any means. And they'd lived there for years. And through COVID, they were there almost all day long. She said, do you mind if I go in for a while myself and just be there before anyone else comes in? And I thought, what a clear view she has about this process. and facing this environment that's so filled with the things that she knew her mother to be in and with and possess and to share with her, that she wanted that time to be able to witness it alone before anybody else came in and just be there. And at 13, I wouldn't say that that's probably rare. It may be rare to express it, but I would say that it probably gets more rare as we get older and get filled with ideas that we think are true and they're the only thing we can do, and it's everybody else is doing it. What else is there to do? And we lose that sense of spontaneity and that awareness and that clarity and that ability to, that sensitivity to begin to actually speak in terms that are recognizable in broader ways than the thinking we tend to repeat and say that we already know and we don't know anymore and that's all we can know and those sorts of things. So I love you guys. I appreciate this. It's very healthy for my healing and my process.
Jack, it's very interesting. We have sensors and I can feel it. And I feel so deeply, deeply sorry for you and for that little girl.
We're going to do the best to give her everything we possibly can, including the freedom to begin to grow up and see things according to what she wants to do. She's very inspired. She's a great singer. It's all she wants to do. She listens to music and sings all the time. It's all she wants to do, and I expect it's all she'll ever do. She found what she loved early. She's going to continue in that direction. So I have a nephew that did the same thing. He loved sports. It's all he ever did. He got so good at it. He got a big job with a internet company that talks about sports because he's a master at sports and football. So it's fun to see kids that do what they love and never do anything else end up doing what they love for work. So that's a very impassioned, passionate, inspired approach. So that's what
Certainly
I do.
not my approach.
That's your given your fighting history. Huh. Yeah. Anyway, I love you guys. Thank you, guys and
I'll
gals.
talk to you later.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you,
Bye,
Jack.
guys.
Bye,
Take
I
care,
love
everybody.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
Lindsay.
Bye.
Bye, sweetheart. Bye, Jack.
Bye.
Bye.